Business Spotlight, brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.
I'm Sonia Farrell. This is Business Spotlight in partnership with Cross Rhythms City Radio and Baba Baboon. Joining me this week in the studio, we've got Alex McAskill, who's an associate at Precept HR. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Well, thank you for joining us here. We've just mentioned there, you're from Precept HR. Now, I just want you to explain, because I come across quite a lot of different businesses and everything that we do here at Business Spotlight as well. But what does HR, what does it really mean in a business?
Yeah, so HR is really just about people. So it's about your employees and how you deal with them, how you deal with them contractually and how you deal with them day to day as well. It really just encompasses everything to do with your employees if you've got them.
And does it come down to sort of relationships as well? Is that part of HR?
Yeah,
like how
definitely.
you communicate?
Yeah, so how you come across to your employees, how you give work to them, when they work and how they work. Yeah, it's just about everything to do with that, really. And
is there all different policies that are involved with HR, or does it just come under, for a business, say, one little book? Or is there all different ones?
So it depends, really. So some people will have like a handbook. You should have a contract of employment anyway. And then, so there'll be a handbook which contains all your policies usually, which we always recommend that companies have. They're usually non-contractual, just so you can change them, because obviously employment law is changing all the time. You set out your policies there, and that just kind of guides then what happens with your employees day to day, and they're the policies that they follow, and they can cover everything from like maternity leave, holidays, disciplinaries, grievances, everything really.
And when we're talking about employees then, who is actually classed as an employee?
Well, there is actually quite a lot of law around that. So there's Labour are looking to change it, but at the minute you're either classed as a worker or an employee. If you're a worker, you've got less rights than you have if you're an employee. So if you're an employee, you've got things like unfair dismissal rights and that type of thing, whereas a worker has less rights than that. And how that actually comes about, it is to do with the contract that you're under, but also it is how the relationship is between the employer and the employee as well. So there's a lot of factors that are taken into account. But yeah, it's better obviously for an individual to be an employee, but if you're a company, you might want to have workers because then they've got less rights.
Can you just explain though, what is the differentiation, if that's the right word, between a worker and an employee?
So a worker will have more independence usually, so like a 0-hour worker. They won't have to work certain hours. They can reject work if they want to, whereas if you're an employee, you kind of got to work the hours that you're contracted to, and you can't reject it. You can't send somebody else in your place, for example, and that type of thing.
So if, a business, a company, and they were even a smaller business, say, for example, and they're looking to employ somebody, not just have a worker, but they're looking to actually employ someone and grow the business, how would they go about that? How would they know, even what to do if they've never done it before?
Yeah, so obviously you put out the recruitment things, and that's a really important starting point. You don't want to start off on the wrong foot, so you need to be careful what you're saying within that job description and things to make sure that you're not discriminating against anybody by anything that you put within that. So even at the very beginning, you have to be careful with what you're putting out there. And then obviously going through the interview process is the same thing. You've got to be really careful about the candidates that you pick to go through and have a really clear paper trail as to why you're not selecting some people, because people can actually bring a claim against you if they think they've been discriminated against, even within an interview process. So you need to be careful from the get-go, really, that you're not making yourself open to claims and things like that.
Yeah, so even, again, just you mentioning that then, thinking about it, from that first recruitment advert or advertisement going out, that call out going out, you've got to be sort of really spot on with how you're wording. Is it the language?
Yeah, definitely. So your wording, your language. So if you're saying about, as an example for like age discrimination, if you're saying we need 20 years experience for a role, then that could potentially be age discrimination if you can't justify that. So yeah, you do need to be really careful from the very beginning.
There's so much to think about, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And that's where obviously we come in and can help and review the documents before they do get put out there, and can reduce the risk down for that as well. And then when employees start, obviously that's why we say it's good to have an employment contract there ready for them, so that they know all the terms that they're going into and that there's no confusion or anything.
And if there is an employment contract then, so say that's been put into place and there's a new employee, or even an existing employee, and things change, or, again, within a job role or a job description, how often usually do these contracts have to be reviewed?
So it depends really on what's happening with the role. Like you say, if they're changing job roles, if they're being promoted and that type of thing, we'd always say get a new contract that's up to date then. But then with an actual employment contract, the law doesn't change that often with what's in there. So you don't have to do that very often, but we do say obviously review it like every 4 or 5 years, that type of thing with employment contracts.
And what is, again, from your experience as well, you work in employment law yourself. I mean, what is the dangers, or even without naming names or anything like that, or anything that you've witnessed, what happens if HR, or even, employment law as well together, what happens if it goes a bit lax, or it's ignored, and it's not sort of used, in a proper manner within the culture of a business? What can be the consequences?
Yeah, so I mean, if it goes wrong, there can be consequences of an employment tribunal being brought against you, and that is a public proceeding, so you could have the reputational damage of that because it is published online when they're brought forward. You've also obviously got the legal costs of defending that type of claim and the management time of dealing with all of that. And as well as that, obviously getting employment law wrong as well, you're damaging that relationship between you and your employees. So employment law really is about being a good employer. That's what it fundamentally comes down to. Obviously there's like the nuances of contracts and that type of thing, but really it is just about being a decent employer and following the procedures that you should. So if it's not followed, you can really damage your culture within your business.
And then again, I suppose that would probably, for other employees within that organisation, again, you could see where that could start to damage, and people might want to leave.
Yeah, definitely.
And go somewhere else.
Yeah, so you see that a lot, obviously, if it was like pregnancy discrimination, that type of thing. Some people feel really strongly about that, obviously, for obvious reasons. And yeah, if they see that happening to their colleague, then they're not going to potentially want to work for a business that's like that. So it can be really damaging. And,
talking about that and the different things, maybe a culture, but the flexible working now, it's become more and more apparent, since the COVID pandemic, when it first happened, lockdowns, more and more people working at home. How is that now? And again, how does flexible working come into this now?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of companies now do have people working from home, myself included. So I work from home full time now, and I didn't do that before COVID. But yeah, I can't imagine going back into an office now. But I think a lot of companies are going back to wanting people back in the office now. I think that's a cultural thing again. I think they're trying to get the teams back together and the culture back that they think's missing. And also obviously when you've got new employees joining, it can be quite hard to monitor them and see what they're actually doing from home. I think quite a lot of companies are concerned that when employees are working from home, they're not actually working. And I think that is starting to creep back in, that people are worried about that when they have people working from home. But again, I think it's a trust thing, isn't it? If you can trust your employees, then why not have them work from home? Because it is quite helpful for a lot of companies for people to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you've just mentioned yourself, you work from home as well. Do you find, just on a personal level, do you find it more productive for yourself?
Yeah, definitely. And it just cuts out the commute time, doesn't it? So I was commuting into Derby, so an hour either way. So that's 2 hours of my life that I've got to pack. And I log on earlier now. And it's just the flexibility, obviously, around kids and dropping kids off at school and picking them up and that type of thing. It really helps. And I think it helps women in the workplace as well quite a lot. Obviously it's quite difficult to juggle everything with family and home life, and I do think flexible working is a massive positive in that regard.
And you a parent? You're a mum yourself, Alex?
Well, stepmom. I've got three boys.
3 boys. So,
busy.
just mentioning that then, women in the workplace. We've had conversations with other guests who've been on, if I'm just going to ask, about women within business. Now, you're obviously employed. You're an employee. So how do you find the law industry now in 2024 for women who are actually now working professional in more senior roles? Do you see that as well?
Yeah, I think it's definitely coming through. So at the minute in the legal profession, it is actually a higher percentage of women that are solicitors than men. We have tipped that balance, but that's not quite shown yet in the more senior roles. But obviously, hopefully, as time goes on, that will become more apparent. But I think like the flexible working and things like that is all a massive help with that, because it is really hard, obviously, when people go to have kids and have a career break and that type of thing. That is when you kind of get held back within your career. But I think that's happening less and less now. And where I am, they're brilliant. Obviously, there's women there that are mums, and my boss is really understanding about school runs and that type of thing. And I don't think you get that absolutely everywhere, but definitely where I am, and you do see it a lot more now that is becoming more understood within the business.
And then going back to, we touched on a little bit about how often and how volatile sometimes laws can change on certain things. And you mentioned, with contracts, it might always be that often, it depending on what it is. But for, say, a business owner or whoever who is really trying to keep on top of everything, I mean, how difficult would you say, or what are the complexities of an organisation trying to keep up to date, day in, day out, week after week, month after month, year after year on HR and employment law?
Yeah, well, it can be really difficult because it is changing all the time. Labour coming in has meant that there's a lot more changes that are coming up. We're seeing that already. There's a new sexual harassment act that's coming in, and that will be a massive change. And obviously it's important that people know about these changes, because you're gonna, if you fall foul of them and you didn't even know that it was updated, then you're going to be in trouble. So there's loads of things out there. We do like a weekly blog, and quite a lot of other firms do that as well. Obviously, I say ours is better. We try not to use too much legal jargon and that type of thing. We try and really like simplise it all so that you know what to do and you know what to change and you know who to come to if you need help as well. So yeah, it is changing all the time, but there's loads of things out there that can keep you updated. You don't have to do it all on your own. There's loads of resources out there. There's ACAS as well, which is a free resource out there to help people. But yeah, it is changing all the time. And I would say it is really important to keep up to date with employment law, because especially with this Labour government that's coming in,
you foresee a lot of change.
Yeah.
And if a business out there is perhaps even, listening, and they're not at a size yet where they have, an in-house sort of HR or, a lawyer on speed dial or anything like that. They're not quite at that position. Again, though, how can they, you just mentioned ACAS there, a resource that businesses can look at. But how do they know what they're looking for sometimes?
Yeah, it can be really difficult. I suppose that's where people like us come in, like HR support. So we offer like a HR consultancy basis. So if someone does need help, say 4 hours a week or something, just to get the contracts up to date and deal with any smaller issues that they may have, then you can bring somebody like that within the business that doesn't have to be a full-time role. I do think you need a dedicated person really to be dealing with HR. I think that is changing more these days, but I think a lot of smaller companies kind of brush it under the carpet and don't really think about it, whereas it is really important to have those contracts in place, to have the handbooks in place, and really have your managers be aware of what they could be doing that could cause issues for a company, because it can be, obviously, if you're taken to a tribunal and you lose, you've got a lot of costs then, and the potential compensation awards and that type of thing. So it can be quite costly to get wrong.
And I'm just going to flip it on the other side, just to get, a bit of your viewpoint on this. So we've talked about, say, business owners and different things like that, and HR and the different laws and everything, and a business keeping on top of that. Now, say they've got everything in place, and it probably does happen, you'll know more than me, but if there's an employee who actually does take a case against, the company, but what sort of, suppose, protection is there in place, whether it's for the company, if it's a false allegation? Is there so many different processes that everybody has to go through before you get to that point? To
bring a claim in the employment tribunal, first you have to go through something called ACAS, early conciliation. So that's a free service, and so an employee will ring up and say, I want to bring a claim against my employer, and then what they'll do is try and conciliate between them both. That lasts usually for around a month, and then if it's not successful, the employee then gets a certificate, and then that's what they can use then to issue a claim against an employer. Now, unfortunately, there isn't really anything to stop employees doing that, even where the claim is baseless. It usually does fall on the company to kind of have to deal with that anyway, whether there is a claim there or not. You still need to respond. You probably do still need to get a solicitor involved in the costs with that, and you can bring a wasted costs application against employees, but they're very rarely awarded in employment tribunals, unfortunately. So most of the time employers do just need to have to take the hit with the legal costs on that. Whilst that is really frustrating for companies, that is just the way that it is set up at the minute. And an employee doesn't have to pay a fee to do that, and they don't have to get a solicitor involved. They can just try and bring a claim.
And is it all about then, from everything that we've talked about as well, and again the complexities, keeping up to date with the different laws, different changes, different governments, you name it, is it a lot to do with, first of all, just being educated about what is needed and what you need to be aware of?
Yeah, definitely. I would say so. Even if it's just the basics, I think if you have employees, you need to know the basics of employment law so that you don't fall foul of these things, and having the basic paperwork in place. I mean, you don't have to have a 50-page contract. Sometimes just a 3-page one will be fine. But it's definitely recommended to have those things in place so that you don't get into trouble.
Yeah. And Precept as well, are they doing anything innovative, just to give an example of different ways in which businesses or employees can go out there and find information?
Yeah, so we do actually do online sessions. We try to do those once a month or once every couple of months. I think we've got a Back to Basics employment law one coming up soon, actually. We do also do in-person events as well, where we run employment law updates. We've got one coming up in November in Stoke, which is around banter in the workplace. So where banter goes too far and then becomes a potential discrimination issue, we'll just be looking into that and the issues around that in that one.
Sounds interesting. Alex, thank you so much for coming in here on Business Spotlight.
Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. That's Alex McAskill from Precept HR here on Business Spotlight with me, Sonia Farrell.
Business Spotlight, shining a light on our local business community. Brought to you by Cross Rhythms and Baba Baboon.